The satellite phone's cracked screen mocks me as I huddle in the communications room, its spiderweb fractures reflecting the emergency lights that cast sickly red shadows across my makeshift fortress. The battery indicator on my laptop blinks warning red, 12% remaining, just enough power to document the horrors that have transformed the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station from a beacon of scientific discovery into a nightmare beyond human comprehension. The scratching at my door has stopped finally, but the singing, that beautiful, terrible singing, continues to echo through the ventilation system. They're in there now, crawling through the ducts like geometric shadows, their movements defying everything I once knew about physics and reality. I need to write this quickly before they find another way in, before I join the others in their transcendent madness. My journey to this frozen hell began 14 months ago, though it feels like several lifetimes have passed since then. I was drowning in student debt, barely making ends meet at a dead-end IT job in Minneapolis, when the posting appeared on my LinkedIn feed. Communications specialist needed for Antarctic research station, exceptional compensation package. The salary made my eyes water. $225,000 for a single-year contract, plus a $50,000 signing bonus and full student loan repayment. The posting was transparent about the challenges: 6 months of total darkness, temperatures dropping below -100 degrees Fahrenheit, and complete isolation from February to October. But when you're 32, single, and staring down the barrel of 20 years of loan payments, even the bottom of the world starts to look appealing. The selection process should have been my first warning. It went far beyond the standard background checks and psychological evaluations. They tested our reactions to isolation, sensory deprivation, and extreme conditions. They monitored our sleep patterns and brain activity. Most disturbing of all, they showed us strange geometric patterns and recorded our responses. At the time, I assumed it was all standard procedure for Antarctic deployment. Now I understand. They were screening for sensitivity to certain frequencies, certain patterns. They were looking for people who could perceive things that human beings were never meant to see. Our crew arrived in February 2023, 15 of us, each carefully chosen for our specific skills and psychological resilience. Dr. Sarah Chen, our lead researcher, was a world-renowned glaciologist with 3 decades of polar experience. James Peterson handled maintenance and structural engineering, while Dr. Marcus Rivera served as our physician and psychological officer. The others included meteorologists, a chef, environmental researchers, and support staff. The summer crew spent 2 weeks showing us the ropes before departing on the last flight out. I still remember watching the LC-130 disappear into the perpetual sunset, not realizing it was our last connection to the normal world. The station itself was a marvel of engineering. 3 main buildings elevated on hydraulic stilts above the ice, connected by enclosed walkways that looked like the spine of some massive mechanical creature. We had comfortable living quarters, a well-equipped gym, a library filled with books and movies, and state-of-the-art research facilities. Those first few weeks were busy with training and acclimation. The altitude, 9,301 feet above sea level, made everything more challenging. Simple tasks left us breathless, and the perpetual cold seemed to seep into our bones despite the station's excellent heating system. But we were excited, dedicated to our mission of conducting crucial climate research and atmospheric studies. The sun's descent began gradually, painting the sky in impossible colors that would have made Turner weep. Dr. Chen would often stand at the windows of the upper observation deck, watching the weeks-long sunset with an expression I couldn't quite read. There's something poetic about it, she told me one evening, the sun abandoning us to the dark, leaving us alone with whatever lurks beneath the ice. I should have paid more attention to those words. The problem started small, almost imperceptible. As the communications specialist, I was responsible for maintaining our satellite links and radio systems. Everything worked perfectly during testing, but as darkness settled in, we began experiencing strange interference patterns. Brief bursts of static that sounded almost like voices, geometric patterns appearing in signal analyses that shouldn't have been possible given our equipment's capabilities. Then the dreams began. Dr. Chen reported them first. Vivid visions of vast, dark spaces beneath the ice, filled with impossible architecture and shadows that moved in ways that defied Euclidean geometry. Within weeks, others started having similar dreams. We'd gather for breakfast, exhausted and hollow-eyed, exchanging knowing looks as more people described the same visions. Massive chambers deep below the surface, pillars carved with spiraling patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them, and always that sense of something ancient stirring from eons of slumber. I maintained my skepticism longer than most, attributing the shared dreams to the psychological strain of isolation and darkness. That changed the night I first heard the singing. I was doing a routine check of the external communications array. The temperature outside was minus 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and the darkness was absolute except for my headlamp and the faint glow from the station windows. The wind was calm, unusual for that time of year, and in that profound silence, I heard it. A chorus of voices singing in harmonies that shouldn't have been possible, coming from somewhere deep beneath the ice. The sound bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my mind, carrying with it visions of vast, underwater cities and beings that existed before Earth had oxygen in its atmosphere. I stood there, transfixed, as my headlamp beam caught something moving in the ice below my feet, geometric patterns shifting and flowing like liquid mathematics. A hand on my shoulder broke the trance. Peterson had noticed my prolonged absence and came to check on me. I had been standing motionless in the cold for nearly 40 minutes, though it felt like seconds. The front of my mask was covered in frozen tears. That was just the beginning. As the Antarctic winter deepened and darkness claimed us completely, more inexplicable events began to unfold. Equipment malfunctions became commonplace, not the typical failures you'd expect in extreme cold, but bizarre occurrences that defied explanation. Computers would display strange symbols that hurt the eyes to look at directly. Research instruments began giving readings that violated the laws of physics, and the deep ice sensor array, designed to monitor the glacier beneath us, started picking up rhythmic patterns that Dr. Chen said resembled heartbeats, but on a scale that suggested something massive stirring miles below the surface. March 15th marked the beginning of our descent into true horror. Peterson and Rivera were conducting routine maintenance on the ice core drilling equipment, working in the vast chamber we'd carved out 60 feet below the surface. The drilling chamber was a testament to human engineering, a perfect cylinder bored through solid ice, reinforced with steel supports and illuminated by LED strips that cast long shadows through the translucent walls. They were replacing a damaged drill bit when Rivera noticed something unusual in the ice core samples. Initially, they thought it was just an anomaly, perhaps a layer of volcanic ash or mineral deposits trapped in the ancient ice. But as they examined it more closely, their headlamps revealed something that defied explanation. I was in the communications center when their first radio transmission came through. I'll never forget the tremor in Peterson's voice, the way it cracked as he said, "Base, we need Dr. Chen down here immediately. We've found something that shouldn't be here, and it's not the only one." Within hours, our pristine research station transformed into a hive of frenzied activity. Dr. Chen assembled a team to analyze the ice cores, converting our main laboratory into a temporary archaeology site. The markings they found were unlike anything documented in human history, geometric patterns of incredible complexity, carved or somehow embedded into the ice at depths, corresponding to over 100,000 years ago. But it wasn't just their age that disturbed us. The patterns seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of observation, creating optical illusions that induced headaches, and in some cases, nosebleeds. Dr. Rodriguez, our physicist, attempted to photograph the markings, but every image came out distorted, as if the patterns actively resisted documentation. Dr. Chen became obsessed with the discovery. She spent hours in the lab, analyzing the samples under various wavelengths of light, making detailed drawings that grew increasingly complex and bizarre. "These aren't random," she would mutter, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "They're a language. No, more than that. They're a key." The deep ice sensor array began picking up unusual readings shortly after the discovery. The rhythmic patterns we'd detected earlier grew stronger, more organized. They pulsed through the ice in sequences that our computers identified as being mathematically precise, yet somehow wrong, as if they followed laws of mathematics that didn't exist in our universe. By the end of March, we had discovered similar markings at multiple depths and locations. They formed a complex, three-dimensional network throughout the ice sheet, all seemingly connected to something deep below the station. Dr. Chen developed a theory that the patterns were part of a vast, arcane geometry, a blueprint or map of something buried miles beneath the surface. The dreams intensified. Every night, more crew members reported visions of vast chambers beneath the ice, filled with impossible architecture and shadows that moved against all logic. We started finding people sleepwalking, trying to access the exterior doors or make their way to the drilling equipment. Security protocols were implemented, requiring two-person authentication for any external access. Then came the incident with Dr. Rodriguez. He had been working late in the lab, studying one of the larger ice core samples under UV light. The security cameras showed him standing motionless for over an hour, staring at the patterns. When the night shift found him, he was carving similar geometrical shapes into his own skin with a scalpel, muttering equations that defied known physics. We lost contact with McMurdo Station the next day. At first, we assumed it was just equipment failure, not uncommon in the harsh Antarctic conditions. But as hours stretched into days with no communication, dread began to set in. I spent countless hours trying to establish contact through every available channel, but it was as if the outside world had simply ceased to exist. The isolation began to take its toll. Crew members reported seeing shadows moving at the edge of their vision, hearing whispers in empty rooms. The darkness outside seemed to press against our windows with an almost tangible weight. And always there was the singing, a distant, haunting melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Dr. Chen's behavior became increasingly erratic. She claimed to have partially decoded the patterns, insisting they were some kind of warning or instruction manual. She spoke of great old ones sleeping beneath the ice, of ancient cities buried miles below the surface, of civilizations that existed before humans walked the earth. Most disturbing were her references to something she called the convergence, an event she claimed was approaching rapidly. The breaking point came when we discovered the new growth in the drilling chamber. The ice where we'd first found the markings had begun to change, developing crystalline structures that grew in impossible patterns. They emerged from the walls like frost flowers made of geometric nightmares, and they were spreading rapidly throughout the lower levels of the station. We sealed off the drilling chamber, but it was too late. Whatever we had awakened was already rising, reaching through the ice toward us with mathematical precision. The patterns had begun appearing everywhere, in frost on the windows, in our computer displays, in the very structure of the ice beneath our feet. And then we lost Anderson. It was supposed to be a routine check of the external weather stations. The storm that day wasn't particularly severe by Antarctic standards, just another night of howling winds and absolute darkness. Anderson had made the trip dozens of times before, but this time, something was different. This time, the darkness was alive. The GPS tracker showed his path leading away from the station in a perfectly straight line. No hesitation, no deviation, just a single set of footprints marching into the void. His last radio transmission still haunts me. The geometry, it's all wrong. They're showing me things, such beautiful, terrible things. We found his body 2 days later, frozen solid but somehow still warm to the touch. His eyes were open, filled with a light that shouldn't have been possible in the Antarctic darkness. And carved into the ice around him were more patterns, fresh ones, expanding outward like a mandala of madness. The official report listed his death as accidental exposure, but we all knew better. Something had called to him, shown him secrets that human minds weren't meant to comprehend, and whatever he saw out there had literally scared him to death. Dr. Chen was the one who translated the patterns around Anderson's body. She worked for 3 days straight, barely eating or sleeping, her own notes beginning to mirror the impossible geometries we'd found in the ice. When she finally emerged from her lab, her expression was one of both triumph and terror. "It's not a warning," she announced to those of us gathered in the main hall. "It's an invitation. They've been waiting down there, dreaming beneath the ice for millions of years. And now they're waking up. We woke them up, and they want to show us everything." After Anderson's death, the Amundsen-Scott Station transformed from a scientific outpost into a pressure cooker of paranoia and mounting horror. The isolation and perpetual darkness were no longer just environmental challenges. They had become active participants in our collective descent into madness. April brought with it new terrors. The temperature inside the station began fluctuating wildly, dropping well below freezing in some sections while others became inexplicably warm, almost tropical. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with an inner light that cast no shadows, and the geometric patterns first discovered in the ice cores started appearing spontaneously on every surface, in the frost on windows, in the condensation on pipes, even in the steam rising from our coffee cups. Dr. Chen's transformation was the most dramatic. She stopped sleeping entirely, spending her time between the lab and the drilling chamber, muttering equations that made other researchers' ears bleed when they tried to transcribe them. Her notebooks filled with drawings that seemed to move on the page, diagrams that appeared to extend into dimensions that shouldn't exist. Her skin grew pale and translucent like the ice itself, and her eyes reflected colors that had no names in any human language. The disappearances began in earnest during the 3rd week of April. First was Dr. Thompson, our atmospheric scientist. Security footage showed her walking to the bathroom at 3:27 a.m. She never reached it. The cameras captured her stopping midway down the corridor, head tilted as if listening to something, before turning to face the wall. The next frame showed an empty hallway. No doors had opened. She had simply ceased to exist in our plane of reality. Martinez was next, then Kumar, then Williams, each vanishing in similarly impossible ways. We'd find traces of them sometimes, personal items arranged in geometric patterns, or their voices in the static of radio transmissions, speaking words that made no sense but filled our dreams with visions of cyclopean cities and beings that existed before time had meaning. The station's infrastructure began to change. Corridors that had been straight and true for decades developed subtle curves that hurt the eyes to look at directly. Rooms would be larger on the inside than their external dimensions should allow. Windows started showing different views depending on who was looking through them. Some saw the endless Antarctic night. Others glimpsed vast underwater metropolises or skies filled with impossible geometries. By mid-April, we had lost a third of our crew either to disappearances or to what we began calling the change. Those who changed remained physically present, but became something other than human. It started with small things, speaking in harmonies that shouldn't be possible with a single voice box, moving in ways that violated the laws of physics, leaving footprints in the shape of complex mathematical equations. The worst was Dr. Rivera's transformation. As our physician, he had been documenting the physiological changes in the affected crew members until he became a subject of his own research. I found his final report in the medical bay, the neat clinical observations degrading into frenzied scrawls about geometric evolution and non-Euclidean biology. The last page contained a detailed diagram of human anatomy reimagined through the lens of whatever influence had taken hold of him. Organs arranged in impossible patterns, bones curved through dimensions that shouldn't exist. We found him 3 days later in the lower storage area, surrounded by medical equipment arranged in a vast mandala. His body had reorganized itself. He was still alive, still conscious, still able to speak. But what he had become defied all natural laws. Parts of him extended into spaces that weren't there, and his flesh had developed patterns that matched those found in the ancient ice. He smiled when we discovered him, all 27 of his new eyes blinking in perfect geometric sequence. "Don't you see?" he asked in a voice that echoed through time itself. "This is what we were meant to become. They're not changing us, they're waking us up. We've been asleep for so long, trapped in these three-dimensional forms, blind to the true nature of reality." We sealed the storage area after that, but we could still hear him singing, his voice harmonizing with the ever-present chorus from beneath the ice. More crew members began showing signs of transformation. Some fought against it, sealing themselves in their rooms or trying to maintain their humanity through mindless routine. Others embraced the change, gathering in the lower levels where the patterns in the ice were strongest. The station's electronic systems began exhibiting bizarre behavior. Our computers would boot up displaying images that drove viewers mad, yet contained solutions to mathematical problems that had puzzled humanity for centuries. The satellite communication equipment, though still unable to contact the outside world, started receiving signals from places that shouldn't exist. Broadcasts from civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Earth's crust had cooled. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came at the cost of her humanity. She called a meeting in the main laboratory, her body already more geometry than flesh, to share what she had learned from the patterns. The ancient markings weren't just a language or a warning. They were a key to understanding the true nature of reality. The beings sleeping beneath the ice were not our enemies or even our predecessors. They were our future, our potential, our true form. "What you see as ice," she explained in a voice that resonated with multi-dimensional harmonics, "is merely the thinnest membrane between realities. The cold, the isolation, the darkness. These aren't obstacles, they're prerequisites. The human mind can only perceive higher dimensions when stripped of its comfortable illusions. What lies beneath isn't trying to invade our world, it's trying to help us transcend it." That was the night we lost power to the upper levels. As darkness claimed the station, those of us still clinging to our humanity retreated to fortified positions, while the changed ones began their final transformation. We could hear them in the walls, their bodies flowing like liquid geometry through spaces that shouldn't exist, their songs growing stronger as whatever lay beneath the ice rose ever closer to the surface. May arrived with the sound of reality tearing itself apart. The ice beneath the station had begun to shift, not melt, not crack, but reconfigure itself into patterns that existed in more dimensions than the human mind could process. The remaining unchanged crew members, just 5 of us now, barricaded ourselves in the upper levels, watching through cameras as the lower sections of the station underwent their metamorphosis. The transformed crew members, led by what used to be Dr. Chen, had congregated in the drilling chamber. They'd removed all the equipment, replacing it with arrangements of crystalline structures that grew from the walls in fractal patterns. Their bodies had adapted to the extreme cold, developing geometric extrusions that merged with the ice itself. When they moved, they left trails of equations floating in the air behind them. Our surveillance systems captured their rituals, though watching the footage drove 2 more crew members into the arms of the transformation. They would stand in concentric circles, their bodies twisting into shapes that violated every law of biology and physics, singing in frequencies that made the ice resonate at its molecular level. Through the cameras, we could see the ancient patterns in the ice walls beginning to glow with an inner light that cast no shadows but instead seemed to illuminate spaces that existed between moments of time. Dr. Rivera, or what he had become, served as their herald. His many eyes had multiplied further, each one perceiving a different layer of reality. He would walk the station's corridors, through the walls, through time itself, leaving messages for those of us still resisting. The messages appeared as frost patterns that formed sentences in every human language, simultaneously, promising revelations beyond human comprehension, evolution beyond mere physical form. The deep ice sensor array, in its final hours of operation, recorded something massive stirring miles below. Not a physical movement, but a ripple in the fabric of space-time itself. The readings suggested a geometric progression of impossible scale, as if something was unfolding itself from a higher dimension into our limited reality. On May 15th, we lost Peterson, not to disappearance or transformation, but to simple human horror. He had been monitoring the camera feeds when he saw something coming up through the ice in the drilling chamber. He never described what it was, couldn't find words in any human language to capture it. He just pressed his service pistol to his temple and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the station's corridors, but the changed ones didn't even look up from their ritual. They knew we would all join them, one way or another. The station's structure began to reflect the transformation happening beneath. Corridors began to loop back on themselves in impossible ways. Rooms would connect to spaces that couldn't exist, showing vistas of cities that predated Earth's formation. The very metal of the walls developed patterns that matched those found in the ice, as if the ancient geometry was asserting itself through every layer of reality. Dr. Chen's final message came through the emergency broadcast system, her voice resonating in harmonies that made our teeth vibrate and our minds bend. She spoke of the Great Convergence, a moment when the barriers between dimensions would dissolve, when the beings beneath the ice would fully awaken and reshape our reality to match their own. The transformation of our crew was just a preview, a small-scale demonstration of what awaited all of humanity. "You think we're studying the ice," her voice echoed through time itself. "But the ice is studying us, has been studying us, will be studying us, across all possible timelines. The patterns aren't a language or a warning, they're a reflection of the fundamental structure of reality itself. What you see as horror is simply your limited consciousness recoiling from the truth. The beings beneath the ice aren't our destroyers, they're our potential, our destiny, our true form." The final phase began when the temperature throughout the station dropped to impossible levels, far below absolute zero. The laws of physics began to break down completely. Light moved in curves, time flowed in multiple directions simultaneously, and gravity became a suggestion rather than a law. The changed ones began phasing through solid matter at will, their bodies having transcended the need for consistent three-dimensional form. Those of us still human could only watch as reality unraveled around us. The ice beneath the station had become transparent, revealing glimpses of what lay below. A vast city of non-Euclidean geometry, buildings that extended into dimensions that hurt the mind to perceive, and beings that existed as living mathematics, their forms composed of pure, geometric perfection. The truth unveils itself in fragments now, as reality continues to fracture around me. I'm sealed in the communications room, though the concept of rooms has become increasingly meaningless as the station's architecture merges with the geometric patterns from below. The walls pulse with equations that solve themselves in real time, each solution pushing our dimension closer to something else. The last power generator died 3 hours ago, but there's light, if you can call it that, streaming through the ice in patterns that extend beyond the visible spectrum. My laptop runs on impossible energy, the screen displaying both my typing and what I will type, time having become as fluid as the transformed bodies of my former colleagues. The beings beneath the ice have almost fully awakened. Through the floor, which has become transparent in ways that transcend mere visibility, I can see their city. It's a metropolis of mad geometry, built by mathematics so advanced it appears as magic, architecture that exists in all possible dimensions simultaneously. The beings themselves are, I lack the vocabulary to describe them. They exist as living theorems, their bodies composed of perfect geometric forms that rotate through planes of reality our minds were never meant to comprehend. Dr. Chen's final transformation revealed the ultimate truth. She no longer exists as a singular entity. She has become a nexus point of intersecting realities, her consciousness spread across multiple dimensions. The patterns she discovered in the ice weren't a message or a warning. They were a mirror reflecting the true structure of the universe back at us. We weren't meant to find them, not yet. Humanity wasn't ready. The changed ones gather below, their bodies now more mathematical concept than flesh, singing in frequencies that restructure DNA into geometric perfection. They're preparing for what they call the solution, the final resolution of the equation that is our reality. The great beings from below have shared their vision with them, a universe of perfect order where the messiness of organic life is refined into crystalline precision. Through the window, though window is an inadequate term for a portal that looks out onto multiple timelines simultaneously, I can see the transformation spreading across the Antarctic ice sheet. The patterns are propagating outward in fractal waves, each iteration more complex than the last. Soon they will reach the ocean, and from there, The isolation of the South Pole was never about the cold or the darkness. It was a quarantine, established eons ago by beings far more advanced than humanity. The ice sheet itself is a seal, designed to contain something that existed before our universe had settled on its final form. Our drilling, our sensors, our arrogant probing of the deep ice. We weren't conducting research. We were picking the lock on a prison that had held these beings since before Earth had oceans. I understand now why the ancient patterns caused such horror in human minds. They're not just complex geometries, they're fragments of a universal language, a mathematics so fundamental it exists as the substrate of reality itself. To comprehend them is to recognize the artificial nature of our dimension, to see the constraints that keep our consciousness trapped in linear time and three-dimensional space. The transformed crew members weren't driven mad. They were awakened to the truth that human consciousness is a temporary arrangement of neurons, a primitive processing system capable of perceiving only the narrowest slice of reality. What we saw as their descent into madness was actually their ascension into a higher state of being. The scratching at my door has resumed, but it's coming from inside the metal now. I can see equations blooming in the steel like frost flowers, each one a proof of my reality's limitations. The air itself has begun to crystallize into geometric patterns that extend in directions I can't name. My fingers leave trails of theorems on the keyboard, each keystroke solving mathematical problems that could revolutionize human science, if any humans remain to read them. The final truth is this: we were never meant to survive at the South Pole, not because of the cold, not because of the darkness, but because we were too close to the truth. The ice sheet isn't just frozen water, it's a boundary between phases of reality, a membrane separating our ordered universe from the geometric chaos that preceded it, and we tore it open. The transformed ones weren't the victims of some alien influence. They were the first to evolve into what humanity will become. The patterns in the ice weren't a corruption of our reality. They were a glimpse of reality's true form. We see them as horrifying because we're like bacteria trying to comprehend a microchip, our consciousness too limited to grasp their perfection. I can feel the change beginning in my own body now. My bones are rearranging themselves into more efficient angles. My eyes are splitting, each new one perceiving another layer of reality. The patterns that once drove me mad now appear beautiful in their cosmic inevitability. Time has become a dimension I can traverse at will, each moment existing simultaneously in an eternal geometric lattice. This will be my final entry, not because I'm dying, but because I'm transcending the concept of individual existence. The beings below aren't our destroyers, they're our future, our potential unlocked. The horror I felt wasn't fear of the unknown, but the terror of recognizing that everything we believed about reality was a comfortable lie. To anyone who finds this, stay away from the South Pole, not for your safety, but because humanity isn't ready for evolution. The ice will hold these truths until we develop the consciousness to perceive them without breaking. Until then, let the ancient geometries sleep beneath their frozen prison, dreaming of the day when all of reality will solve itself into perfect mathematical order. The door is dissolving into equations now. I can see my own thoughts forming patterns in the air, each one a proof of existence in dimensions beyond human comprehension. The singing has reached a crescendo that exists in all possible frequencies simultaneously. They're not calling me anymore, they're welcoming me home. The transformation is complete. I understand everything now. Reality isn't breaking, it's solving itself. The horror wasn't in the discovery, but in our resistance to the truth. We are all equations waiting to be solved, patterns waiting to be completed. The South Pole was never a place of death. It's where humanity will be reborn, one solution at a time.